Hi, folks. How is everybody doing today?
Pretty good. How about you?
Doing moderate.
Yeah, trying to get caught up on stuff. Kind of pulled an almost all-nighter last night, but you got to do what you got to do sometimes.
Indeed.
Not for this class, though. Your assignments are short, sweet, straightforward once I figured them out. JavaScript, however, was not.
I'm gonna give everybody one more minute here. I think maybe we got everybody. I guess I can get going here. Sweet. Okay. So quick review of what we talked about yesterday. So yesterday we talked about HTTP. HTTP is a protocol. It's communicated over TCP, just like what we did on the first day. It's a protocol that web browsers speak. So yesterday we used the web browser. We connected to a server running locally with Netcat and showed that the web browser was speaking HTTP. And then for the second part of the class, we talked about HTTP, the protocol, and then we used Netcat to make a connection to my module 5.ml server, and we made some requests to it manually with Netcat. So today, we're going to be doing pretty much the same thing, only today we're not going to be using Netcat. We're going to be using some real tools, what developers actually use. We're going to be talking about a couple different ways you can approach making requests. So anybody have any questions for me before I get started? Okay. So today, section 3, HTTP tools and libraries. Let me post the slides once more in the channel. So as I mentioned earlier on in the module, Netcat is great for experimentation. It's great for learning, but when it comes to making requests with Netcat, that's not something that ever actually gets done. If you were to tell a web developer, I was making HTTP requests yesterday in class manually, they'd look at you kind of funny and be like, why are you doing that? So we're going to be talking about some tools you actually use to make requests. Utilities that provide a sort of a nicer interface. And these tools really exist to make your life easier. I mean, you don't want to type in requests manually with Netcat your whole life. And we're going to talk about the first 2 here today, and then the second 3 we're going to talk about tomorrow. So the first one we're going to talk about is called Postman. Second one we're going to talk about is called curl. And then the last 3, which are the libraries you can use in JavaScript to make requests, are fetch, Axios, and jQuery.ajax. And we're going to mostly focus on Axios. We're going to quickly touch on fetch and jQuery.ajax. You're going to be using Axios for the next module, Joey, so I want to mostly focus on that. Okay. So Postman is probably the tool you're most likely going to be using for the most part when you're making HTTP requests, just to test things on your own manually. And Postman is a graphical interface for making interactive HTTP requests. So unlike Netcat, this is an application you open up on your computer like VS Code or like Chrome or like anything like that. And it gives you a bunch of buttons and a bunch of boxes you can type into and you can click. And you can click like make request, and it will make the request and show you the status code and the response body and the response headers and all that sort of stuff. So I'd like everyone to download Postman. And to download Postman, you can go to this URL here. And I will put that in Slack. And when you go there, you will get something that looks kind of like this. And what you want to do is you want to click download. And then it's going to give you a zip file. Open up the zip file, and you're going to get an app file, and you want to put that in your applications folder. And then open it up. So I've got the zip. I'm going to extract the zip. This is something you should do along with me here. Okay, you got that. I'm going to put that in my applications folder. Now I can open up Postman. I'm going to click skip and go to the app. We don't need to make an account. Okay, very good.
Can we get some yeses and nos in the chat if you were able to visit postman.com and get the download started? Just want to update us in the chat about how the download progress is going. Thanks.
Carolyn, you can open up the app. Just go as far as you need to get to this screen. And when it asks you if you want to make an account, there's a little link at the bottom that says skip and skip ahead into the app. Just click on that. If you decide later on you want to make an account, go ahead. But for now, don't need to worry about it.
It's probably worth it to make an account. I use Postman all the time.
Okay, I'm going to give everybody maybe 2 more minutes, and then we'll get moving here. Carolyn, there should be a link in the lower left-hand corner or the lower left-hand quadrant of the window. It's kind of small and gray and says skip creating an account. Or alternatively, you can just make an account if you want. It's not going to matter either way. Okay, I think I'm going to keep moving forward here.
I'm sorry, Ryan. Can I just show you the screen I have?
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I minimized the Zoom thing on this.
I think we might have lost Carolyn, so I'm just going to keep moving forward. Okay. So once you're in Postman, you're going to want to click this little plus button here to create a new request. I'm going to close this sidebar just to make it a little bit easier to, well, I think I'm going to close it. It's fine. There we go. So in Postman, this is kind of the interface you'll be seeing. A tab bar and then a bunch of sort of text inputs. And everything in the top section here, this is information about the request. So some of these should look kind of familiar from yesterday. Like there's a method, there's a URL which has the path in it. There's a bunch of headers. There's a request body. And then you see below, there's a bunch of response data. So you'll see there's a status code, the response body, there's response headers. I've kind of pointed all that stuff out here if that's helpful to see. But in effect, this is the same sort of thing we were doing yesterday, where you're entering all that information. Just instead of having to type it in, get the format all perfect, you're now able to put it in this program, click send, and it can format it all for you. So effectively, the computer can do what the computer's good at, and you can just tell it what to do, which is a lot less finicky. So as an example, let's make a request here. Let's make a request to that module 5 fruit endpoint we used yesterday, since that's a pretty easy one here. So I'm going to go to module5.ml/fruit and then make a get request to it. We'll click send. I'm going to get back. There we go. So isn't that so much easier? So you'll notice that I've mentioned here the word URL a few times, and I haven't actually talked about URLs yet in this module. And that's kind of on purpose, because up until now, we haven't really encountered them like seriously, significantly yet. So what is a URL? Well, it's sort of a way of combining the IP address or domain, the path, and some extra parameters into one kind of long string. And a URL is a thing in a web browser you type into the search bar at the top of the screen. And it contains a couple different parts. It contains a protocol. Usually it's in the format of something : / / So you're probably familiar with like HTTP : / or HTTPS : // There are other ones too, like FTP : / is another one, for example. After the protocol comes the domain name or the IP address. So in this case, example.com, but you could just as easily here put localhost or 1.2.3.4 or any sort of thing that you could connect to, any sort of thing that would alias to an IP address. That could be an IP address, it could be like a domain name, it could be something in the DNS lookup. But after the domain name, you have the path. So that's what we were typing in as the second parameter before yesterday, where we said like get like /student/1 or get / fruit. That's where you'd put the path. And then after that, there's this other thing, which we didn't talk about yesterday, but there's another field you can include called a query parameter. And query parameters are a way you can kind of specify extra metadata in a URL. And this is probably something you're thinking, wait a second, another way I can specify parameters when I make a request? Don't we already have headers? Don't we already have the body? Like, what's the difference between all of these? And the answer is, it's just kind of down to programmer preference. Query parameters tend to be used when you're making GET requests, the kind of information you might want to put in a body if you're making a GET request. So like, for example, let's say you were making a request to like /students to give you a list of all the students. And you wanted to only return all students that like had the name of Ryan. You might say something like pass a query parameter that's like first name equals Ryan. So one example of query parameters is like a way of filtering data. It's kind of a pattern they're used for. Maybe like if you've ever looked at the URL of like a Google search, you'll see the path is /search $Q equals your search string. So in Google's case, they're using that Q query parameter to store the search data you've typed into the search box. So query parameters are just another way you can provide data. And one other thing I want to mention, if you want to specify multiple query parameters here, the syntax for doing that, you put a question mark, the key equals the value. And then if you want to put another one after that, you put an ampersand. And then the next one, key equals value, another ampersand, something else, on and on and on. So that's kind of how they're structured. At least today, we won't be doing anything with query parameters, but they're going to come up a little bit later on in the module. So I just wanted to introduce them so you're at least familiar with what they look like right now. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions?
Hey, Ryan, there's a question in the chat. Fabilia asked, how did you get to that page? Can you go back to Postman and just kind of walk through the fruit example again?
Yeah, definitely. So how did I get to this tab, or how did I load up this module5.ml thing here?
I'm assuming it's this part. Okay. Cool.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. How did you get to that page in general? I downloaded the Postman, but.
So once you've downloaded Postman and you open it up,
Okay.
You're going to see a screen that asks you to log in.
Okay.
Once you're on that screen, you can either create an account, or there's a little link in the lower left-hand corner that says skip logging in, go directly to the app. You can either make an account or click that link. And
Okay,
once
I
you do that, you should
clicked
see
on
this.
creating an account, so okay, I have an account.
Okay. Did it bring you to this page?
No, it brought me to one that says your workspaces.
Would you be able to, could you share your screen, or could you post a screenshot in Slack?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I'm
I'll
not sure
post
off the
it in
top of my
Slack,
head.
too. I'm working on 2 laptops right now, so I'll post it in Slack.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll do the same thing because I finally got back into Zoom and figure out what's going on between my 2 computers. So I'll just show you where I ended up after I had it installed, downloaded, installed, and when I clicked on the app, the page that came up, what I have. So I'll put that in Slack as well. Student pasted code?
Yeah, that works. Yep.
Okay, thank you. That way I won't slow you down. Thank you.
I can walk through how to make this request one more time if anybody wants me to do that.
I was also going to say, I can share my screen for a second because I am logged in, so I might be where, people might see what I have instead, if you don't mind.
I missed it because I got booted out of Zoom, so it was like a whole chunk of information. All right.
Okay, let me, the first time I'm sharing my screen, so we're going to see if I can do this. Okay, desktop one. No, it's not. Not here.
Never mind for me. It pays to actually read. It's such, you can skip and go right to the app. I think I'm good. So no screen share for me. Thank you.
Cool, I'm glad you got there. Can everybody see Postman? On here, I think it says I'm screen sharing. So this is where I ended up when I logged in. Can I zoom in a little? Yes.
Thank you.
No problem. And I figure out how to do that. That's really the next question. Does anybody know how to zoom in? Just asking for a friend who is me.
I can look at Command Plus.
Command Plus? Okay. There we go. Okay. How's that? Okay.
Good, thank you.
Cool. Okay, so if you're here and if you see this, my workspace, what you can do is come over here on the right and hit this plus button, and that'll give you a brand new request. And then the get's already here for you. And this is where Ryan's going to type in that module 5.ml/root. And then if you hit send, cross your fingers. No? Okay. Oh, there it is. All right, cool. And then it came back, apples, oranges, and bananas. Thank goodness, I was worried something was wrong with it. But that's how you do it if you are logged in currently.
So I got one question to go through the query parameters again and how to format those. So I'm going to go through that one more time. So with query parameters, you put them at the very after you put the path. So protocol, domain name, path, and then at the very end of the path, you put a question mark, and then the key of the query parameter equals the value, ampersand, the key equals the value, ampersand, and that's just kind of the order you repeat. It's similar to the way you'd spell out headers in an HTTP request, like we were doing yesterday, where there's the key, there's sort of like a symbol and then the value, and you kind of do it in that order. But it's important to note the formatting here is different. And I'm also going to mention that there are certain characters you can't put into here natively. So for example, if you try to put like a space in the middle, well, and Yeah, there we go. If you tried to put like a space in there, that wouldn't actually work. There's some limitations around query parameters. I'm gonna get into those a bit later in the module. But this is the sort of format you'd follow. And if anyone wants to see this, I'll leave this this modified copy here in the slide. You can reference this. Oh yeah, so I put this in here too. So kind of going back to yesterday, like here's an example of how these correlate to what we typed yesterday. So HTTP turns into the port, the domain there turns into the domain there, and the path there turns into the path there. And I just did this demo. Okay, so I've got some exercises I'd like you to try live here. This should be, I imagine, pretty simple. It's similar to the sort of things we did yesterday, but this time I want you to do them with Postman. So these are to do live right now.
So I see that Carolyn asked if we save these. I believe the answer is no, that these are not part of the homework. These are just in-class exercises to test out Postman, but I'll double check with Brian about that.
Yep, Kelly, you stole the words out of my mouth. So Carolyn asked, where do we enter the port 80? Well, if you remember, port 80 is that's the protocol HTTP is on. So if you include the protocol of HTTP here, the default port it's going to use is 80. Now, if you had a different port, you could put colon like 5000 here. So you could put like colon 80 here. That's fine, but 80 is the default, so you can just omit it, and it knows to use port 80 because that's the port for HTTP.
Excuse me, Ryan.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? This is Latonia. When we put in the hello for the body, I just put in another / and put hello with that. Did I do that wrong? Because it looks like I just got like a pretty version of the error message.
Yeah, so you want to put that inside of Postman here.
Oh, I see params where it says body underneath.
Yeah, so you've got body here. Now there's a couple different options. In this case, you just want to send it just raw text. And for that, you want to select raw. We'll even say text is what you're going to be sending there. But there's a bunch of different we haven't talked about it yet, but there's a bunch of sort of different formats you can send data over the body of an HTTP request. And some of these allow kind of nicer interfaces for entering those. Or you can select none and it'll just leave the body empty. So what you want though there is raw.
So Ryan, I'm looking at the Postman tool and it's got lots of cool drop downs and everything. I'm not sure exactly what we are supposed to be doing with the information, just picking from the different menus or.
Yeah, good question. So the primary thing you should focus on first here is this line here where it says the method and then the request URL. And
Yes,
for the first example I had here, which I realize now I'm covering up and should probably have open here. This first example, you've got the host name and the path. And if we go back to URLs over here, host name goes here, path goes here. And it was a GET request. So if you get module5.ml
mhm,
/ and it was,
apples. Yeah,
and then click send,
okay,
go.
and that's it.
That's it.
I thought I had to like choose other stuff.
Now, what's good about Postman is if you're making a really simple request, you don't have to choose any extra parameters. You can kind of just leave unset everything you're not using.
Oh, okay. So where did it go?
What do you mean, where did it go?
I made the request. Where do I see like an output? Oh, it's down there. I see.
Down
I'm
there.
just getting to know the interface. That's all. I got it. Never
Yeah,
mind.
response information's down there. The request information's up top.
Yeah, got it. All right, I will do the next one. Thank you.
Yep. Ariel, you're having problems with the echo example?
Yeah, I got back 1, and I don't think that's correct. Like the other one obviously came back Apple, not 1. So
Most likely, how did you enter your body?
wrong, I'm sure. I did it the same way as we did the first one because I got a little overwhelmed with the amount of parameters and things on there. So is it not typically the same as we did the first one?
It's a little bit different, yeah. So for the second one, I just kind of went for the first one, so I can do the second one here live too.
Sorry.
No problem. We got another whole set to do for exercises. So it says the method is post, so I'm going to choose post. So it's the host name is module5.ml. It says the path is echo, so I'm going to go echo. And then it says the body is hello. Now, by default, you're going to see something kind of like this. The way Postman works, it's got a lot of interface elements kind of hidden or like under tabs, and sometimes you have to open up an interface element in order to use it. So for example, this tab bar right here, if you want to set request headers, you have to go to this headers tab and set your request headers in here. So you'd set like the key of the header here, the value of the header here. If you want to set your body, you have to set that here. And by default, I think when you go to body, it's going to look like this. It's going to have form data selected. Well, as I was saying to Carolyn, there's a lot of kind of different ways in Postman you can send body information. And at least for right now, the only real things we've talked about are requests without a body or requests that have just raw text as the body. So those are the kind of these two options: none, which is just don't send anything along in the body of that request, or raw, just send some text in the request. So if you wanted to send text along in this request, like you wanted to send hello, we'll put hello here. And then
Yes, I'm sorry. So when I went under body, it was on none. And for some reason, I sat there looking at those radio buttons and didn't recognize that I could change them. So that was just me being stupid. I'm sorry. No, I'm good now. I got it to come up that way through raw. So thank you.
Cool.
So I have a question because I just followed along with the steps that you just did. And then I click send and it says there's no test results for this request.
No test results for this request. Where do you see that? In the response body?
Oh, sorry, I was in test results. But yes, I got it. Never mind.
Okay. Yeah, that's something else to mention. Postman used to be really, really simple. It used to basically just be an interface that had like this right here where you could enter request information and then see the response. Over the years, it's got a lot more complicated and it's got a lot of extra features right now nowadays. That's cool, but like as a beginner, you really don't need to touch any of that. It's kind of just clutter. As you grow though, you might find some of that really useful. For example, they have a whole feature set where if you want to test to see if a service works, you can write all these example test cases and have it just run through all those requests for you, which is kind of cool. We use that at work and it's kind of neat. But yeah, for just one-off requests, it's a bit of an overkill application, but it's kind of the industry standard. So how's everybody doing with these exercises? Have they been able to get through it?
We were just doing 2 of them, right?
Yep, just these two.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm not real happy with the interface yet, but it's just because I don't know the tool. So we'll be okay.
Fair enough.
And you just explain why, because they've put a lot of bells and whistles.
Yeah.
Functionality, the more you have, the better, but not necessarily. So there's like, I could use a light version maybe, but we're good.
Yeah, actually, well, I don't know if I want to give you folks more things to think about, but there's an application similar to Postman called Insomnia at work that some folks like a lot. That's another, there's a bunch of these applications nowadays that are all very similar, but maybe have better interfaces. Okay. I see a couple folks have said they finished them. So if anyone wants me to hold off, I can hold off a little bit longer, but otherwise I'm going to keep moving forward. Okay. So that's what we're going to talk about with Postman for right now. The next thing we're going to talk about is curl. Postman's pretty straightforward. Curl is going to be probably a little bit more difficult for you because we're going back into the terminal. But it's a really important tool to know and understand because it comes up all the time. So curl is a command line tool you can use to make requests. So the same thing as Postman, only in like a terminal form. It's a command line application. And like a lot of command line applications, you've probably noticed they follow this format where like you put it in a command and you put all these like dash letters and then like a parameter, and then like dash a letter and then a parameter. And those are called flags. So for example, this curl call here has a dash uppercase X get. That's a parameter. So it's like the dash uppercase X means something, and then get is the what it means. You might guess it means method. Dash uppercase H means something, and it matches to this string here. Dash D is same sort of thing. And then at the very end, you put in the URL you'd like to make a request to. Now, the 3 parameters you really need to know for curl that are like the most important ones are dash uppercase X, dash uppercase H, and dash D. Dash uppercase X is the method you're going to be using when you make that request. Dash uppercase H is going to be any sort of request headers you want to include along when you're making that request. And dash D is any sort of body information you'd like to include. As far as the other things we've talked about with HTTP, like HTTP version, curl's going to pick that automatically for you. Same thing with Postman. I should have mentioned that. Those tools take care of that sort of implementation detail for you. So I'm going to do an example with curl here. So let's say I wanted to make a request to our good old module5.ml/fruit endpoint. The most simple example of curl, you type curl space, and then a URL you want to make a request to. So in this case, http://module5.ml/fruit. And then you hit enter, and it gives you back the response body. So I'd encourage you to try this out on your own and see if you can get it to work. I'll paste this command in Slack. Has that worked for anybody? Cool. I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Now, curl can get a lot more complicated. Let's say we want to add like another flag here. Where'd my terminal go? There it went. Okay. Let's say I wanted to add like I want to do that lockbox example. Remember that had a custom header from yesterday. So I can go like -H, authorization, super secret. And that works. Let's say I want to make a request that's not a get. I want to make like a post request. Do -X, post. If I wanted to include a header on that, I could do my header value, something like that, and I could run it. Now I'd be making a post request with this custom header. Now I do want to point out this -H, I put single quotes around the parameter after it. And that's kind of important. The reason why it's important is if I just did it like this, what the shell's going to think, what curl's going to think, is it's going to think that this -H, this is the parameter for it. It's not going to know what this value is. It's because there's a space here, like the space separating is kind of how it's able to parse this out, figure out what is associated with what. So to tell it that this whole thing is what you want associated, you've got to put single quotes around it. And there's no reason you couldn't put single quotes around like these things too. Just they're not needed, so typically they're omitted. So why am I talking about curl? You might think, curl, like why is this helpful? We talked about Postman. This seems like not as nice as Postman. What's the big deal? Well, really the big thing with curl is your request is contained within a single text string. And why this is sort of a big deal is if you're making a request and you want to share it with somebody, it's a lot easier to share with somebody a curl call than to share with them like a screenshot of Postman that they then have to like try to replicate. In fact, this sort of curl format is so universal as kind of like a way people communicate requests. Pretty much every tool has a way you can export things as a curl. And you'll have to pardon me because I don't exactly know how to do it in Postman, but there's definitely a way. Yeah, there we go. So like I click this here, this little button here, and it'll give me a curl call for what I've typed over here. And there's actually a way in Postman you can like import a curl call into Postman. So you can say like import, it'll give you a little text box. You can type in a curl call and hit like import, and it'll populate Postman with all the information in the curl call. So the reason why I'm teaching this to you, I mean, I think it's a good thing to know, but besides that, just it's knowing that this is kind of the standard way that people communicate and talk about requests. And in the future, if you have problems with a request and you want to share it with me or Kelly or Max or anybody like that, the way that's going to be most helpful for you to do it is to get it in that curl format, send it to somebody, then they'll be able to reproduce that request on their end. So that's really what's important about curl. One more thing. So if you go to into DevTools in the browser, have you folks encountered the network pane yet in Chrome? You talked about it? Okay, I'm going to quickly go through it because I want to talk about like there's a way Chrome can give you the curl calls it's making, or the equivalent curl call of the request it's making. And this network pane in Chrome, example.com. So when you make a request to a website, this network pane in Chrome, it'll give you every single request that is made when loading the page. So for example, let's say you've got an HTML file and you've got an image in that HTML file. What's going to happen is Chrome's going to make a request to the server. It's going to get back that HTML. It's going to parse that HTML and it's going to see, wait a second, there's an image in there. And then it's going to make another request out to the server to get that image, and the server is going to return that image back, and then the web browser can parse the image and render it. And what you'll see in that case is you'll see, if you go to the network pane, you'll see two requests. You'll see a request to get the HTML, and then you'll see a request to get the image. And if you, let's say, have a style sheet, you'll see a request to go out and get the style sheet. If you have some JavaScript, you'll see a request to go out to get every JavaScript file. And in general, when you're debugging network problems in the browser, this is the first place that you probably should go. Now we're going to use this later on in the module, but I bring it up to you now because you can see it. So you can see like request message the browser makes. You can see the status code it gets back. You can see all the response headers and the request headers. You can even see the body it gets back, which this should look pretty familiar, just some HTML. But the other thing you can do is you can right click on this, go to copy, and copy as curl. And if I go back over to my terminal and I paste, you'll see a kind of pretty scary looking curl request. But if I hit enter, well, let me go to something else because this is, or actually that. Need to get rid of the cache here in the browser. Here we go. Copy as curl. Go back over to the terminal here. If I paste this, you'll see I get back the HTML for the file here. And this is a way, this is going to become more important later in the module, but this is a technique you can use when you're having a problem in a browser with a network request. You can send this to somebody and they'll be able to reproduce it, this curl call. So that's really kind of taking you the whole way around. That's why curls are going to be important. Does that make sense? Okay. So 2 tools, which one should I use? If you're crazy like me, I pretty much use curl exclusively. I'm kind of nuts, and there's some reasons why I like that more than using Postman. And some of you who might decide eventually, yeah, I like curl better. Probably none of you feel that way right now, but we'll see. Maybe your opinion will change. But really, you can use whatever tool you want, or both, or anything else. You can use whatever really tool you want to make HTTP requests. I'm familiar with both Postman and curl. Kelly is too. So if you can use whatever tool you find more comfortable, basically throughout the rest of the class. So I've got a bunch of exercises here we can go through to make some HTTP requests. And because we're going pretty fast here, I'm probably going to cover the next section here today as well. So we're going to do this exercise now, and then probably take a break, and then we're going to go to section 4. Sounds good, everybody? Okay. So these are the exercises, and they're going to look pretty familiar to what we did yesterday because they actually are the same exercises. It's just I want you to do them today with Postman and then with curl. So run through them once with Postman and then run through them once with curl. Sounds good?
So Ryan, are we using the Visual Studio Code terminal for any of this right now? Or just post? Yeah, we must be for curl, right?
For curl you are, but for the Postman exercise, you just need to use Postman.
Okay. And do you want us to do like a screen capture or you can download?
You can take,
Postman?
You can take screenshots, you can download it, whatever you find more comfortable. I can figure it out.
Okay. And so I guess I'll have to bring up the slides to refer to what you just went through because it's a lot to pick up. All right, thank you.
Yep.
For the screenshots for Postman, do you want one each individually or just take one of the final one when we've made it through all four?
Probably one for each one individually would be better. I really would just like to see the data you've entered, see the request and the response for each one. So however you can make that happen, that's good with me. Shantina, there should be a thing on Google Classroom you can attach them to. Assignment. Yep.
So Ryan, for the exercise with the lockbox and the password, in Postman, it asks for which type of authorization you would like. Should we choose basic authorization?
Great question.
There's a bunch of them. I don't know if it matters.
Now you can pick off here. There's a bunch of options here. I would suggest for this, just go to headers and enter the header, just like the same header you entered yesterday. In fact, if you go over here and you pick an entry and you enter the information it wants and click like add, what it'll do is it'll populate a header over here automatically for you. So I just say put it in here and it's going to be easier.
Yeah, I've got the header, but oh yeah, okay. I closed that side panel. Okay, so instead of using the drop down.
Yeah, so I think you were over here.
Yeah, I collapsed that.
Yeah.
So I was actually using the tabs.
I think you want to be in headers here.
Yeah, so you don't want to, oh, I was wondering why it said something about it will authorize when you send. Okay, so I want to be in headers. Yes, that's what you said.
Yeah.
I know, I heard you. All right. And then I need to see what's in the panel here to pick. Mosers. Oh, here we go. There's the icon to uncollapse it. Okay, here we go. So what did you click on in the left?
I clicked on headers, and then over here you can type the header name, or if you start typing authorization, it'll auto-complete it for
I
you.
just type it in under key.
Yep.
Oh, wait a minute. There's two of them. There's authorization and, okay, I'm getting myself confused. There's authorization and the password. I'm doing the get lockbox.
Yes. So if you're doing that, you've got to enter the proper information up here. So you've got to
Mhm.
enter your method and you've got to enter your URL.
Yep.
URL. And then you've got to enter the header, and that you had enter the header down in this section right here.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. Then click send.
Oh, wait a second. Okay. So below where you put in the method and the URL and the send button, when it has the little navigation there and it has headers,
Mhm.
I click on that. And then I went ahead and for like contact for the first key, I put content length and the value was 44.
Mhm.
Then I'm supposed to go down and click on this other headers below it.
Yep. So if you want to enter multiple headers, go like this, and then you click on this down here and you start typing the next one, and it kind of adds a new field below it. It's a bit of an unintuitive interface when you see it for the first time.
Okay, because it gets confusing. What is my input versus, so to add another one. I'm sorry, can you just do that again?
Yeah, so if you've got one in here and you want to add a second one, this is this row at the bottom of the table.
Yeah.
You click on that row and you start typing. Notice how when I type a character, it will autocomplete in here and allow me to type something in here. But then below it, and now a third row is shown up. And so this effectively, this interface, whenever I start typing in the final row, it adds a row below it. So I can always add one more if I need to.
Make it easier for you. You know, it's kind of not, I don't know about anybody else. It's kind of a hard screen to see on the monitor. They're the colors they've chosen. I don't know if maybe blow it up a little or.
I can make it a little bigger. That'd be helpful.
Yeah, if it's good for anybody else. I don't know. It's just kind of hard to see that. Oh,
How's
well,
that?
Well, that's probably more than good, but thank you.
Yeah.
It's just not rendering the light blue or whatever it is. All right. Thank you.
Excuse me, Ryan. This is Latonia.
Hi.
Hi. I'm in a terminal. I'm on the last one. I feel like I'm a little confused about where I'm putting the module 5. Are we still including that?
Yes. So let me go back over to where are the exercises? Exercise over here. So you're on this one?
Yep.
Okay.
So what I did was I did curl dash capital X post dash capital H. Then I did the content link. And then I put the module 5 after the body because I tried it after the post before and I got an error.
Yeah, so you've got to put this, the URL you're talking to, you've got to put that at the very end.
Okay, so that's
in here, it's not going to work.
okay. So I put it at the end, but maybe my problem is the path. Should the path be someplace else? Because I put module5.ml/ and then I put the path.
Did you put http:// before the module5.ml?
Oh no, I did not do that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You'll find that some tools won't require you to enter a protocol, but others will require you. Curl is one that will require you. And I would just say as a habit, just enter it always.
Okay.
No tool is going to reject something that has a protocol in front of it.
Hey, Ryan, I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
So you know how yesterday they were doing exercise 4 and everybody got like a 200 response, but nothing actually came back?
Yeah.
Did you happen to update the server, or is it going to be another case of 200 but nothing gets sent back?
I didn't update it because I didn't want to update it and accidentally break something.
That's totally fair. It's understandable.
Yeah.
I just wanted to cover that in class just in case people were getting to that, like question 4.
But I will say if there was a weekend and I had a couple days to test things thoroughly, I definitely would have updated it. So maybe I'll update it this weekend.
All right, thanks. Also, Kyle asked a question in the chat that I was hoping we could go over. Kyle asked, why don't you need -x for get and curl on the first exercise?
Ah, very good point. So there are some defaults that curl has, and I thought I actually had a slide on this, but I guess I don't. By default, curl will default to a get request. It'll default to no headers, and it'll default to an empty body. So if you omit any of these, that's what you're going to get. So if you just do curl just this, like if you just did just that, it's going to be a get request. And in general, when we're talking about HTTP, if something doesn't specify a request or a method, it usually means defaulting to a get method. Susan, would you like some assistance?
Sure, yeah, I don't know. I don't really get what I'm reading. Like I see what you have, but it doesn't translate to me to what to type in. Because I don't see what post is on your slides.
Yeah, so let me, if I were to update this like that, does that help at all?
I guess. Just change it?
Yeah, just change it.
Oh, okay.
So this parameter here can be equal to any of these values, or in practice, really, we're only going to use get, post, put, and delete, but any of these values.
Right. Okay.
In general, though, how are folks doing with this? I imagine it probably went pretty smoothly with Postman, but how's it going with curl? Can I just get some meat snows in the channel?
I'm almost done with Postman and I'm going to tackle curl. Wish me luck.
So one thing I do want to address real quick is that these flags I'm using for curl are actually the short flags. Curl's kind of got another set of flags with the longer flags. These are going to be the ones you're going to see probably more often, but there are other aliases for these flags that are longer. So for example, you might see dash dash request instead of dash x, which means another word for method. Dash dash header instead of dash uppercase h. Dash dash body instead of dash d. I didn't cover them here because this is a format you're going to see more often. But I think the way Postman exports curls, it uses those longer flags. So if you encounter that, that's what's going on.
Hello, it's Latonia again. This is for you or Kelly, because I think Kelly just asked about this, but I did the last one in Postman and I just got back a 1. So is that relevant to the whole, we got the 200 okay instead of getting the 1 word?
If you got back a 1, I would say analyze where you've put your body. Make sure you've put your body in the right place. Because I think someone else got that back and didn't have their body in the right place.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
but in particular, when you go to the body tab, it's probably gonna have none selected by default. You want to make sure you select raw and you put your body where it says raw. These are sorts of we haven't talked about it yet, but there's a bunch of different sorts of ways you can encode bodies. You can send them in different formats, and these are different formats you can send them in. For now, we're just want to send raw text. Fancy.
Actually, I think I have the 200. Can I just share real quick so you can look and see what I'm looking at?
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
While she's setting that up, I just realized something in the Postman. I thought I had the option to download and save. It only saves like an HTML file that just has the text of what you did. It obviously I should have thought, is it going to actually save what you see? So I'll have to do them again and take screenshots, but now I'm getting good at it. So, so there's always something. All right. That just thought in case anyone else, everyone's probably a lot smarter, but so you don't take your time to do that and not really get something you can use. So anyway.
So if you select body, what do you see? It does look right.
And see how this 200 okay is here? I'm just wondering, why is this here?
That's a great question. Try taking that curl, copy it and paste it into a terminal and see if you get the same thing.
This whole, all of it, right?
Yep. Okay. So one other thing you can try, hit the up arrow and at the very end of that curl, put a dash V, dash lowercase v.
Dash V?
Yep. So this is a nice little thing you can do. This puts curl in verbose mode. And if you hit enter, it'll actually print out everything it sends. So everything with a caret to the right means it's sending it to the server, and everything with a caret to the left means it's receiving that from the server.
Okay.
This is kind of a nice way to make sure it's sending what you think it should be sending.
Yeah.
And that looks about right.
Oh,
Okay. Try this. Try sending to port 5000 instead of port 80.
What am I doing?
Try sending to port 5000 instead of port 80. So if you go back into Postman, for example,
Okay.
after your module 5.ml, put a :5000.
No space.
Yep, like that. And now try it. Huh. Okay. I think the computer might have outsmarted me today. I'm not exactly sure what's going on off the top.
Okay. All right.
So
Thank you.
I'm going to say if you get this, you did the right thing.
Thanks.
Yep. So I'll say for some context, the way that different tools format HTTP requests, like when it actually sent into the server, is sometimes very slightly differently. It's slightly different. Like for example, one might put an enter at the end of the body, or one might put a space somewhere that it maybe shouldn't, and it's still within the HTTP specification, so it's still valid. It's just sometimes slight differences like that can have issues. The other thing that could be going on here is I wrote this server really quickly, and I might not be parsing the body correctly. And it's most likely one of those two things. So. But how's everybody doing? Have people been able to complete both exercises or get most of the way through both exercises? Okay. Seeing a decent amount of yeses. Susan, if you want to post an example of your curl in Slack, either Kelly or I can look at it. But I'm tempted now, maybe we should take a break, and then once we get back, we can go into the next section. So I was planning on doing the section tomorrow, but we kind of went through this section a bit faster than I thought. So I'm thinking we might go into the next section today. So if folks want to maybe take like a 15-minute break, we can come back at 7. Cool. If anyone's still at their computer, if you could just give me maybe like a rough confidence in how you feel about promises. I know Max said he talked about them. We're going to talk about them briefly in a second here. I just want to know how I should tailor the discussion so I can prepare a bit here. But if not, I'll ask it again once everyone's back.
How we feel about what? I'm sorry, a car went by, I couldn't hear.
Promises.
Oh.
I think the way you said that tells me
Yeah, I
need to
don't
know.
I don't remember if that was one of the things we covered on Thursday with Max where I kind of got lost, or if that was one of the things that we did during the application process that I didn't understand, but it's one of those two.
Yep. Okay. Cool. Yeah, JavaScript's about to come back in full force.
Yeah, no, I actually enjoyed the JavaScript module. It's just that last class I got lost at the beginning of it. I couldn't understand how the
So I'm not looking at it right now because I can't, but I finally figured it out after class and I was like, okay, now I can go back through this video and hopefully I'll understand more of it. But I couldn't understand how the result was being returned out of that first function. And because I couldn't see that, I couldn't follow anything after that.
Yeah. Well, luckily we're not going to be using them in an advanced capability right now for today, but just they're going to show up, I guess.
Hey, Zach, I don't want to interrupt you, but when you're done, I have a question. Not
Yeah.
Zach, I mean Ryan. Sorry. When I went through these in Postman the first time and didn't get the screenshots, everything seemed fine. Now I'm not getting any output and I'm just on exercise 1 and I'm not getting anything.
This is with Postman or curl?
Postman.
Oh, okay. Would you be able to share your screen maybe?
Sure. I'm hitting the wall here. I'm about to fall asleep with my eyes open. All right, here we go. All right, so as I said, I went through the 4 and was great and thought I was actually saving a screenshot and I wasn't. So now I've gone back and I'm on the first exercise where you get fruit and there's no header and no body.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I put in. And when I hit send, it didn't, unless there's more to this, then I've got to expand it more.
Well, so can you select the body tab at the very bottom of the screen in the response section?
Oh,
You're
there
still
you
getting
go.
404, but oh yeah, I see what's going on. But yeah, okay, so now you at least see the body and you see it's got some HTML. It's giving you back a 404 not found.
See, this is not an intuitive interface, I'll tell you. Okay.
I'm going to give you a hint. Take a look at your URL, analyze it. You've got a small typo in there.
Oh, I'm sure. Oh, yeah, there it is again. That happened to me. All right. Let me get back to you if I need it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Ah, so Susan, your problem looks like if you take a look at what you entered, it says curl, and then you hit enter, and then you put everything else, then you hit enter again. You need your whole command to be on one line. So it should say curl space -x post -h content length, all that stuff. You need to make sure it's on one single line. If you do that, I think it's probably going to work.
Oh, you don't need to be in curl. I thought that's how you did it.
No, so curl is a command that you give it all the parameters after it in line when you type it. So you don't hit curl and hit enter. You type curl space and then enter everything in line.
Does everything look in like the right order though? Otherwise, like it's all right?
Yep, it looks all right to me.
Okay.
One thing you might have to do is after content length, the colon after it, you might have to put a space
Oh,
there.
space, yeah.
Otherwise, though, that to my eye looks right. But run it and see.
I'll try again. Okay, thank you.
Brian, are you there?
I am there. What's up?
Sorry. Let's see here. From my words today. Remember before, how I clicked on the authorization option because I thought that because the value of that particular thing was authorization.
Mhm.
There's a steady green, like traffic light next to it, and I don't know how to toggle it off, or does it matter?
Share your screen. I think I know what you're talking about, but I want to make sure I'm thinking of the same thing.
All right. There, you see? Right there.
Yeah. Okay. So what I think you want to do here is where it says type basic auth, click basic auth and select none, I think. Or there's an option in there that is similar to none.
Okay, I'm not seeing where you're looking. There's a lot of stuff to read here. Where?
In the top request section where you have the tab that say params, authorization, headers, body, all those tabs. Right below authorization, it says type and then basic auth.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yep. Click on basic auth and go to no auth.
Oh, there, it's right at the top. Okay, thank you. It was staring at me. Thank you.
No problem.
Some questions, right?
No, it's fine. I think part of the problem is developers normally have pretty large screens, and Postman is an application that really is not built for a small screen. Even me, I'm working on a 16-inch MacBook Pro, and it's still like kind of a little bit too small for me. So I guess if you have an external monitor, maybe try to put it on there, but otherwise, I don't know how to help you there. Okay, folks, I think we're ready to get started here again. So Kelly and I had a discussion while you were on break. I think we've decided we're going to hold off on Axios until tomorrow. And we're going to hold off on the further HTTP libraries. And really, it's because it's just something I want to make sure we can devote a whole day to. And I don't want to get halfway through it and have to interrupt it and do it again tomorrow, because it's a bit of a thing to wrap your head around, and I don't want to leave you halfway through. So there are three sorts of things that we can spend maybe like the next hour on. Kelly suggested that a bunch of students were curious about what the server that I wrote that runs on module 5.ml, what that actually looks like. So if people are interested, we can kind of look through the source code of that and see like what that actually looks like, kind of how it works under the hood. I'm going to be stealing a little bit of the thunder from the server module, but I don't think we're going to get really far into it enough where like it's going to affect what they're going to teach in that module. So I think it would be fine. So that's thing one. Thing two is, you remember way back to Monday, the kind of thing I opened this module with was that New York Times project, that New York Times bestseller list. So we're getting to the point where probably at the end of the day tomorrow, you're going to start to know enough where you can start to think about how you'd actually make that list, how you'd render that to the screen. So thing two is we can start off by writing out the kind of scaffolding the page for that, getting it ready for tomorrow. And then the last thing is, I have a lesson that Kelly seems to speak kind of highly of that I taught at the Cohort 1, which is a lesson about reading stack traces and interpreting error messages. And apparently, apparently it went well back then, and I'd be willing to go through that again now if you guys would like that. So those are the three options. What do you folks like? What would you like to see me talk about? Or we can do a review. That works too.
Is there an option to make a poll for this?
Oh yeah, polls are a thing. That's right.
Mhm.
Okay. It's gonna take me a second to figure out how to do. Okay. Poll. Do that. Okay. I think I just started a poll. Let's see what folks are interested in here. Actually, I think I wish I could have made it so you could vote for multiple. I don't know if you can do that. But I think the Q&A session is winning. Oh, wait a second. People are liking that New York Times project. Oh, no, going back and forth here. But it sounds like those are kind of the two things that people are largely wanting to do. Let's see. Yeah, I think we pretty much have everyone here. So this is what we got. Q&A session 1, then New York Times project, and one person wants to do a lesson on stack traces, and we will probably, most likely, we're going to end this module early, and we're going to have a day or two at the end that we have extra time, so we'll end up doing that lesson at that point. So it'll happen either way. Okay, so I guess let's start with this review and Q&A session. What would you folks like me to go through? Do you want me to just kind of talk through every part we've done so far, or do you have specific questions for me, or how we run this is up to you folks. Oh, I see there's a bunch of questions in the chat that I didn't notice. By stack traces, do you mean the errors in VS Code? I mean like when you load up a page and you get like a red error in the console, it says like error, like something is not defined, then it shows you all those lines about like where the error happened. Understanding those and parsing through those problems. Promises is related to what we'll be doing next. Yeah, I could probably do that. Are there any topics in particular from the last few days that anyone would like me to go through? Post
Excuse
them in
me,
the chat.
Ryan,
Yeah.
we're kind of staring at the Hack Up State logo instead of seeing you.
Oh, sorry. I forgot.
I don't know, maybe you're shy.
shy.
Thank you.
Yep. Sorry about that. Yeah. So, are there any topics from the past few days anybody would like me to go over? If so, I can talk about promises a bit. Okay. I think I'll talk about promises a bit. So what has Max talked about with promises? I I'll be honest, I didn't watch his last few classes, so I'm not exactly sure how much you folks know about them right now. Did he talk about has he talked about callbacks? Is that a thing he's mentioned? Okay. Has he talked about what asynchronous means? Okay. Okay, let me share my screen then. I am going to get a new file here. So have you folks talked about set timeout? That's probably a good place to start, if not. Okay. Let me, I think I see a lot of shaking of heads, but everyone's muted, so I'm not 100% sure. Let me start there, because that's going to require us to talk about callbacks, and that'll get us in the right frame of mind to talk about promises. So in JavaScript, functions are what are called first class. They're first class values. And what that means is when you pass a function is something you can assign to a variable. So just like maybe you do like const or like var a is equal to 1, you can assign 1 to a. But in the same sort of way, you can put a function here. And what this is saying is this function is assigned to this variable a. And if you call a, you're now calling this function. And in effect, this syntax is the same thing as this. I imagine you've probably seen this syntax before. And these two examples here are equivalent. Now, because functions are first class, they can go anywhere a value can. You can kind of think of the thing after the equal in the var a equals here, you can think of this sort of space as a sort of hole where you can put any sort of expression you'd like. So maybe you could put a string here. Or maybe you could put an expression here, like adding two numbers or adding a number in a variable. In the same sort of way, you can put a function there. It's another thing that can fit into a value-shaped hole, a hole that where you can put data here. In the same sort of way, another sort of place where you can put data is when you're calling a function. So if I'm calling a function, I can put, and I realize all this is like tons of review, but I'm saying it in this sort of way because I'm about to make a logical jump and I want to make sure you all understand this. You can put values inside of the function parentheses here, and that's going to include those arguments when you call the function. And it goes value, comma, value, comma, value. But you can put any sort of value you want here. You can put a string. You can put an expression. Or you probably are seeing where I'm going. You can put a function. And that is totally valid code to put a function in here as a parameter. And the way you should interpret this when you see this sort of syntax is you should see this function here. I'm calling this function, and I'm giving this function two parameters. I've given this function first, this first parameter 1, and then I'm giving it the second parameter here, which is a function. Now, why would you ever pass a function as a parameter to a function, you might ask? Well, I mean, you probably already know the answer since you've talked about callbacks a bit. The reason why is it's often really nice to be able to pass into a function sort of the ability to run code in an external context. What do I mean by that? Well, a great example is like a click handler. Let's say I have a sort of browser could include in the browser code, like when you click on the page, it would like look for the element where you're clicking, and in the browser code, it would just run the code in line. And that could work, but it doesn't really allow you to customize that piece. You need to somehow be able to take that action of clicking on a thing and make it a parameter, like an ability to change what that functionality does. And being able to pass a function in sort of allows you to say, here's some code that I want to run when a certain action occurs or a certain event happens. So an example of that in context for like the click example, or like in a processing an event example. Let's say I have like an element. I'm not going to write the whole thing out, but let's say this is like a JavaScript element, a DOM element, like a div or something, or a button or something. This isn't real. This is sort of like pseudo JavaScript. It's not real JavaScript, but the idea here is directionally correct. You could do something like, let's say you have a function you can call on this element, maybe called like on click. And when you this is a function, and you could pass a function into this. And remember, when you're reading this, you should just be seeing like this is a function that's being called. This here is the function, and this is just a parameter I'm passing in, the secondary function here. Now, when I pass in that secondary function, I can do whatever I want in here. And then from within this onClick here, I can then invoke this code whenever I want. So this is sort of like a parameterized way I can call into another location, and I could say, please run this thing whenever I want to. So inside of the implementation for onClick, maybe I have something like onClick, and I have my function here, parameter. And I could do something like have some logic here. And then eventually, at some point later on in the code, I could say, call my function. And when I call my function, that's going to call this thing right here. Does this conceptually make sense to folks? I need to have the chat open here so I can see what people are saying. There we go. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Very nice. Okay, so let's actually write. Oh, one more. Yeah, let me walk through it one more time. So this function here, this function is a value, just like any other value you can pass in. I can have like a 1 here. I can have anything I want here. And this function is callable in another context because it's a parameter that's passed into onClick. So let's say I had like 1 and 2 here. That probably makes sense. Like A is going to be 1, B is going to be 2. But if I made this function, B is going to be equal to this function. And at any point in here, I can call B, and it's going to call this function because this is being passed in here. So that's really the core concept. Now, to kind of extend this further, there's a couple built-in JavaScript primitives that allow you to deal with these sorts of functions being passed into functions. The term for this you'll hear thrown around is a callback. And the reason why you'll hear it called that is because when you call this function, it calls back to your code up here. So that's why they call it a callback, because you call this and then it calls back up to your original call. And an example of like a place where this is used in the built-in JavaScript standard library is set timeout. Sounds like Max already talked about this a little bit, but set timeout is a built-in function available globally in any JavaScript runtime. And it accepts 2 parameters. The first parameter being a callback function, and the second parameter being a number of milliseconds to wait before calling that callback function. I'm going to say 1,000. 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second. And what the setTimeout function does behind the scenes is basically you call it, and it has now a reference to this function. It's got a reference to this number of milliseconds. Then once you call it, it sort of like hangs out in the background and waits for a second to go by. And once that second goes by, because it has a reference to this function here, it now can call that function and execute it. And what you'll see if you run this, over here, make that a little bigger. It's going to wait a second, and then we're going to get 1, 2, 3. And that's because after that second, it's calling this function. So here's an example of like actually how that's used. Does that make sense to folks? Cool, I'm seeing some yeses. Okay, I'm gonna keep going here. But if anyone says no, I can quickly run through that again, no problem. So something you'll notice is so far when we've used our callbacks, they haven't taken any parameters. The callback has just been like an empty function. Like I haven't put like anything in here. And that's kind of on purpose. I didn't want to complicate that to start with. Because the most basic use of a callback is just to tell another function to run, not to give it any sort of extra data, but you can actually add you can add data to this function. You can call this callback function with more data and send more data along. So for example, like let's say I had some sort of crazy operation, and I wanted to, once the operation's complete, I wanted to call this function. And I wanted to include, maybe like I want to read a file. Yeah, that's a good one. I want to read a file from the file system. And when I read that file, I then want to call this callback function, and I want to include the data from the file system from that file. So let's say I've got like a text file, or I've got like a JavaScript file that contains some text. I want to call that. I want this callback function to be called. Maybe I want like a data parameter here. This data parameter might be equal to the contents of the file. So a way we can do that, and I need to get a, okay, I can't do this in VS Code. I don't know how VS Code works well enough. We're going to the terminal. Sorry, folks. Okay, we're going to Node. Have you used Node interactively like this before? If you haven't, I'll not do this. I'm seeing some confused faces, so I'm not gonna do this. Okay, fine, I'll explain it. There's a way with Node where if you run Node without any file parameters, you just run Node on its own, you actually get a little prompt here, and you can type JavaScript. It'll run it for you, just line by line. Very similar to the console in Google Chrome. So I find when I'm playing around with Node, this is kind of the easiest, quickest way to get into it. What does make it a little hard is if you want to enter multiple lines in a row, it can be a little more complicated. And there's some special terminal-related shortcuts you have to use. But it is a nice little environment to play around with. But because you're not as familiar with it, I'm just going to put everything in a file. I'm just going to run node that file name. That's going to be probably more like what you folks have done previously. Okay. So if I, in Node, you've talked about require, and you've talked about modules in JavaScript. Built into Node, there is a module called FS, and it's a module that allows you to read files from the file system. So I'm going to turn on syntax highlighting. Let's see, JavaScript down here. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's better. Okay. So I'm going to const fs is equal to require fs. So this should look pretty familiar to you folks. Now in fs, there are a bunch of options here, a bunch of things you can call. In particular, the one we're going to want to call is read file. And what read file takes, it takes a file path. And then it takes, at the second parameter, a callback. So just like we use with set timeout, that's code to call later on once you've read the file. And what read file is doing behind the scenes is it's a function you call, and it's taking a path and a second parameter that's a function. And then it does whatever it needs to do behind the scenes to read the contents from the file. And then once it's done, it then calls that function. And once it calls that function, then is able to execute your code and run it. And you might wonder, like, well, why doesn't read file just return something? Like, wouldn't that be a lot easier? Like, you could just say like read file, like a file, and then be like data, and then you'd be done, and then you just like be able to like console.log console.log data like that. That's a lot easier. Like, why don't you do it that way? It's a really good point. And the reason why is a bit complicated, but the gist of it is, in JavaScript, anytime you're doing an operation that takes a decent amount of time, and by decent amount of time, this is sort of relative, and decent amount of time, like reading something from the file system takes a decent amount of time, because it's an operation where it has to like reach out to the hard drive and has to cause it to spin up and has to look for the file and find it, read out the bits and like parse them and then get it back into JavaScript. And that takes like milliseconds, but in comparison with running like operations in the CPU, like which take nanoseconds, that's kind of a lot of time. So anytime you're doing anything in JavaScript that takes a decent amount of time, you can't really do it synchronously like this, because if you do it synchronously, it's going to plug up the JavaScript runtime. It's not going to be able to run fast and efficiently. And this is a little bit deep into JavaScript, and the reasons don't really matter here as much. But whenever you're doing an operation in JavaScript that is a slower operation, you're going to see it requires you to pass a callback instead of getting a return value. And really the reason there is just if you are able to do a callback, you're able to call that function, and then the function can kind of go off in the background and do all its magic and its stuff. And then once it's done that, it can then call the callback function with the data. And because you don't have to return something immediately, the callback can fire later on, and then code later on in the file can run. So what do I mean by that? Well, here it's very clear the order that things are going to run. This first line is going to run, the second line is going to run, and the third line is going to run. But if I introduce a callback, things get a bit more complicated. So if I put a callback here, I put a parameter here, data, and then I log out data like this. Then here I'm actually gonna put some strings in here too. I'm gonna say like in callback, and then after fs.read file. So naively, if you're looking through this, you'd think that the code's just going to kind of run in order. It's going to run this first line. It's going to read the file. It's going to call the callback. It's going to run this console.log, and then it's going to run do this log at the very end. And that's a good guess, but that's actually not what's going to happen. What's going to happen, and we can run it here so you can see. I'm going to call this test.js. Go over here. I'm going to go node desktop test.js. Well, it would help if the file I'm reading actually exists, for one. Let's just say, it's not going to work. Okay, I'll do that. Well, almost worked, but this is enough to prove the point. You'll see here that it actually didn't run in that order. I got this after log here, and then I got the in callback log. Notice that's in the opposite order they are here in the code. You see the in callback log first, and then the after log after, but it's an opposite order here. So that's a bit counterintuitive, but the reason why that's happening is when this code runs, it's going to run this first line, it's going to import the require module, or import the fs module. It's then going to start reading the file. And then it's going to start that, but it's going to kind of keep going on in the background. And then while that reading the file operation is going on, it's then going to go down to the last line here. It's going to log out this console.log at the end. It's going to log out after fs.read file. And then the JavaScript is going to kind of like chill and wait for a while. It's just going to kind of sit there. And then once it's completed reading the file, it's then going to call this callback. and then it's going to log out the contents of the file, or in my case, an error because it's not able to read it. But the concept still holds. So this is a bit weird. This sort of concept of code you're looking at not running in the order you think it runs by just analyzing the file. This is one of the things that makes JavaScript tricky as a language. In general, what do you folks think about this? I imagine this probably is a bit confusing, but do you understand at least what I'm saying? Okay, I see lots of yeses. Cool. Okay. So this sort of operation, this operation where it's kind of going on in the background, and it isn't like blocking and waiting, like it's not returning a value immediately, like require returns a value immediately. This sort of concept is called an async operation, asynchronous operation. This is called a synchronous operation. And these are this is a really core concept to get into with JavaScript that you're going to run into all the time, especially once you get into the browser and like React and stuff like that. Synchronous operations, they do what's called block the event loop. When a synchronous operation starts, it runs, and then it sort of runs and churns, and then it returns value immediately. And if you have a code that is entirely synchronous operations, which for the most part, the code you've written so far, I would guess has been, it's going to run predictably in the order you'd think it's going to run. But once you get these async operations in here, these operations where the code has to call a callback in order to get the value at the end of the operation, you can't just return the thing. That's when the order, out of order thing starts to become an issue. And to give you a preview into what's going to happen in React, sometimes you need to call async operations inside of async operations. And you get into this sort of situation where you've got like 5 or 6 operations going on at the same time, and you have to reason about what order they're going to complete in, and like which of them should happen at the same time, and which of them need to happen first, and then like a couple of them need to happen second. And this stuff can get very complicated. And a big source of bugs in computers and in computer science is this sort of thing, and they call this a race condition, where you have two code paths that are kind of racing, they're running at the same time, and you expect maybe one to finish first and the second one to finish second, but maybe they finish in the wrong order. And sometimes, depending on how fast the computer is or like how a computer is configured, like different things can happen, and they can happen in different orders. So anyway, that's not related, but race conditions come up all the time. So okay, this is callbacks. Callbacks are great and all. One last thing I'll just mention: the reason why I got an error here is this callback takes 2 parameters. It takes an error and the data, and the way this works is when it gets called, it either gives you null and then a string, or it gives you an error and then null for the data. So that's why I was getting this here. This really should be error, and that's why I saw an error there. But just to, if anyone was curious what was going on there. So this is the callbacks. Callbacks are great, but callbacks have kind of a problem. And I was touching on this before. When you're running things, lots of operations in a row that are asynchronous, you start to get into this concept called callback hell. And that is the technical term. That is what people call it in the real world. I didn't just make that up. And that's, imagine you had to read 3 files in a row. You had to read file 1, file 2, and file 3. And for some reason, you need to read file 1. Then after you read file 1, you need to read file 2. Then after you need to read file 2, you need to read file 3. So you don't want to do them all at the same time. You want to read file 1, file 2, file 3 in order. The way you do that is you would call your first one here, and then inside of the callback, you would put another one of these. And this would be file 1, this would be file 2, and you can guess that then inside of here, you do one more, file 3. And then due to scoping, talk about scoping, I'd imagine, if you named each of these like data 1, data 2, data 3, in this context, you have access to all of them. Because these are all inside of all these functions, and due to lexical scoping, anything defined in a function above is going to be accessible in functions below. And this works. There's nothing wrong about this code, but imagine like you're writing this sort of thing a lot. One thing you'll notice is that the code starts to go to the right a lot, like when you indent it. Like we're already 3 indentation levels in. Imagine you had to do this a few more times. Your code's going to kind of start going to go more to the right than it is going to start to go down. And when you see this sort of triangle here, where you see your code's going out and coming back in, like more than it's going down, that's an indication you're kind of in callback hell, because you've got all these callbacks and you have to think about the order in which things are happening. You have to think about which calls are inside of which calls. It just gets really complicated. And really what you would want to do, like if this was not JavaScript and there wasn't this stupid thing about async operations, like the way you do it is just like this. You go data1 is equal to that. And then you do 2 and 3. I mean, what's easier to read? Like this or this? Like this is so much easier to understand. And the problem is doing it this way is inefficient. You can't just kind of block and wait for those read files to occur. Like it's just not going to be efficient, and it's going to cause problems for JavaScript. So a solution was kind of proposed, and it's using these things called promises. And promises they're kind of scary at first, but in concept, they're very similar to callbacks. It's really just kind of a different way of doing a callback. And I bring them up because we're going to be talking tomorrow about Axios. They're going to be using promises heavily. And promises are, in general, sort of the way these days a lot of asynchronous operations are done in JavaScript. A lot of sort of the browser APIs use promises, the newer browser APIs at least. You'll see a lot of libraries you'll bring in will use promises. It's just kind of the thing people have standardized on. So what the heck is this promise thing? Let me take this code and put it in the pasted code channel. Oh, wow, Kelly, you typed it all out. Okay. By the way, how am I doing here? People understanding this? I've been seeing a lot of yeses in the chat. So I'm assuming I'm doing a decent job here. Okay. Yeses are good. So promises. A promise allows you to basically return a value for an asynchronous operation. So it effectively lets you write code like this, that JavaScript runs like this. How do you do that? Well, to start with, I'm going to show you the first syntax of promises. That's really much more similar to the way callbacks work, so it'll be easier for you to wrap your head around. Then we're going to go to the more complicated but more used syntax. So let's imagine fs dot, come on, VS Code, what are you doing? fs.read file. We're going to pretend that this is a synchronous or we're going to pretend this returns a promise. So previously, we put a function here. With things that use promises, they don't take a callback parameter. Instead, they return a value called a promise. And a promise is a lot like an object or an array or any sort of primitive. It's a thing you can assign to a variable. It's a thing you can pass into functions. It's a value you can use anywhere you can use a value in JavaScript. The thing is, a promise you can kind of think of as sort of like a box. It's a box that can either be empty or full. And by default, a promise is a box that is empty. And usually the way a promise that's empty is thought about as a promise that contains the value null. And then at some point later in the future, someone can put a value into that box. And when they put a value into that box, the promise then contains that value. So it could be a promise that contains like an object or an array or a number or any sort of thing. the way that you interact with promises is typically as the person using a function that returns a promise. You want to know when a value gets put into that box. The time when that happens is really when what you care about. That's really when you care about the value, because you don't really care about it before that happens. You don't really care about it after that happens because you heard about it when it did happen, so you'll have access to that value. And the way you sort of do this, so, oh, there's a website on Callback Hell? I had no idea. So, pretend promise contains one of these promise things. The promise has a method on it called then. Now, I don't know how much you folks have talked about methods and functions, but then is basically similar to the call. It's similar to, it takes a similar parameter as that callback parameter you were passing your read file before. So then is a function. It takes a callback. And this takes our data. So this sort of syntax, it's very similar to the callback syntax. It's just instead of putting the function in the call here, instead you put it, you attach it to the promise. And because the promise here is what's returned from this thing, that's how it's able to figure out that this function is what it should call when it's done executing this operation. Now, how in practice does this work? Like, how does it know how to do all that like fancy linking of like where the function is? Well, the true answer is it's all inside of the promise implementation. But I think what would be helpful is if I write out kind of another way you can think about promises and show you kind of, if you wanted to make your own asynchronous thing that was a promise, how you do that. So this is sort of a high-level promise example. And I'll say tomorrow, this is basically as far as we're going to go. So if you can type this blindly and just understand that this function gets called when an asynchronous operation, hint, an HTTP request, finishes, then you'll be good for tomorrow. But I know there are folks in here who are curious, so I'm going to keep on going and tell me to stop if I'm getting too in the weeds. I like talking about this stuff. I think it's fun, but I'm also kind of crazy. So, okay. So there is what's called by default in the browser, just like set timeout, there's a global thing called promise, uppercase P promise. And when you want to create a new promise, so this is what would be done like inside of fs.read file. You do something like this. Have you guys seen new yet? I'm guessing probably not. Okay, darn. Think of this as you're just
new date in the chat app that we did.
Okay. Think of it as you're calling a function called promise, and this new thing is just a special way to call this function promise. That's not completely true, but that's good enough for the understanding you need to follow this example. Promise takes a callback. You'll notice callbacks are used all over the place. It's a concept that like you're going to quickly end up having to become familiar with, and you're going to become familiar with it just because you're going to use them so much. So promise takes a callback. And this callback takes two parameters. Well, actually, we'll just give it one for now, resolve. Now, this is where you do your asynchronous operation. So do something asynchronous. Now, if you notice, this promise here is the same sort of thing as this. It's got this callback here. It's got this resolve thing. This callback is called by the promise. This is going to get kind of, there's a couple levels of callbacks here. So if you don't follow this, it's totally fine. I'm mostly saying this because I think some folks are curious. When promise is called, it accepts this callback here. The promise immediately calls this callback and gives it this value resolve. Resolve is a function. Resolve is a callback, another callback function passed into this callback function. So we're already 3 levels deep in functions, and we've only written 3 lines of code. Welcome to JavaScript. But at any point later on, so you've done your crazy asynchronous thing. Yeah, Karen, kind of like a placeholder with instructions. Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. You can call resolve, and you can give resolve anything you want. What resolve basically does when you call it is it says, put this thing into the box, the promise box. So what actually happens behind the scenes is when you call resolve, it stores this value inside of the promise. And because you've attached to the promise this function with then, it will then know to call this function with this data. Kind of crazy, huh? But you didn't have to understand that. In effect, when an asynchronous operation occurs, this promise, you attach the callback to the promise, and then when the asynchronous operation completes, it will then call the asynchronous operation with the data that you would get in the callback. That's really the important takeaway. So I will paste this in the pasted code channel. Wow, I didn't realize I'd be writing code already here in day 3 here. Such intense code. So I bet folks have tons and tons of questions. If you've got a really involved question and don't want to ask it here, feel free to send it to me in Slack afterwards, or we can get into it now. But if you have any questions for me, I'm more than willing to talk about it.
I have a question. This is Susan.
Yeah.
Is there a way you could explain to me sort of, like I sort of understand, but like what a promise is doing in the real world?
Yeah.
Like not behind the scenes, but what you're using it for? What an example?
Yeah. So one example, well, the example we're going to talk about tomorrow is making HTTP requests. So when you make an HTTP request, that's an asynchronous operation. It's going to take an amount of time for the browser to open up that TCP socket, to send data to the server, send that HTTP text data, and the server is going to take some time to read that data, to process it, to formulate a response, then send it back to the client again. So because that takes a certain amount of time, the library we're going to use is going to return a promise. So what it's going to roughly look like, and this is some spoilers for tomorrow, is you're going to have like my make HTTP request, make a GET request to like /fruit, something like that. It's going to return a promise, and the data it's going to return back, maybe you'll have like the status code or like the body or things like that. So this is kind of like an example of how you would how this would be used in the real world. Another example, something I find myself writing a lot, is this. There are a couple libraries in NPM that do this for you, but this looks scary, I know, but I'm going to explain it. It does use this new promise thing, but there is a good reason. Okay, like this. So what this function here is, this delay, this is a function. It's like set timeout, only instead of it working with callbacks, it works with promises. So set timeout, remember, went like this. We give it a callback. And you give it an amount of time to wait. This delay function up here, and again, this isn't part of the standard library. This is just something that I find I write for myself a lot because it's just such a useful function. And I think it's going to give you an example of like the sort of sort of thing you could do with a promise is delay can give us 1,000 and then dot then this and this do the exact same sort of thing. So this may be a good takeaway if you're having trouble understanding this, where understanding promises, where what's being done here in effect is the same thing here. And this function and this function are called in the same sort of way. It's just the way you specify that function with a promise is different. With a promise, you do it with this dot then thing. And with a callback, you specify it as one of the parameters to the calling function. Does that help at all? A little. Okay.
Hello.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Okay, I want to get like really real world here. And I mean, like when you're dealing with maybe gardening and how when you get your bulbs and you plant them, what's supposed to come from that bulb is actually what the promise is.
Yeah, you can think about it like the bulb is the empty promise. And then when the bulb grows and you have the plant that comes out of the bulb, that's the promise with data in it. And it takes time for that bulb to sprout. It doesn't happen immediately.
Right. And that's where the asynchronous, you know what I mean?
Yeah, synchronous.
That's where things, even though things aren't happening one by one after the other, but even though they're not happening that way, they are happening behind the scenes. And it's like in the end, in the resolve, all those pieces kind of come together.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think what you said, I understood it. I'm going to add one more thing to that analogy because I think that went over well with some folks. A synchronous operation would be like you planted the bulb and it immediately sprouted and became a full-size plant. Right. An asynchronous operation means it takes time to actually sprout. And because JavaScript has to run fast, if it waits for it to sprout, it's not going to be able to, if there's other things it has to handle, it's not going to be able to handle those other things.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. There's one more thing I can talk about, but it's kind of building on top of all this. And I think already people are starting to lose me a little bit. So I think I'm going to hold off on Async Await because that's maybe to a level that you folks mostly aren't ready for. If you want me to, I can try to explain it if some folks are getting it. But let me know in the chat if you'd like me to try it. Okay, sure. So Async Await is a way. So this is great and all, but wasn't the original goal to make the code like really straightforward and linear like this? Like those dot thens don't really help. So Async Await is sort of a way you can take this syntax and make it into this syntax. And this is probably going to blow some of your minds. And it is, what's actually going on behind the scenes is kind of nuts, but we're not going to get into that. What you could do, if you've got something like this, I'm actually going to put a parameter in here just to make this more obvious. Async Await adds two new features of the language. It adds a keyword called async and a keyword called await. And by keyword, I mean like a built-in language feature, not like a new variable or like a new global thing in JavaScript or like a new value like set timeout or promise or window or something like that. I mean like a language feature. And what it does is it allows you, it allows the JavaScript runtime, when it encounters a line, one of these lines that has this word await on it, it will basically pause. It will pause and it'll go off and work on other things in the background. And then once the asynchronous operation has completed, it then will go back to that line and resume, giving you back the promise value unwrapped. So it'll get rid of the promise and it'll just give you the value inside of the promise. This is a sort of thing where this is what I would call like seriously advanced JavaScript. I'm mostly bringing it up just so you if you see the word async and await, you'll kind of know what it's related to. I don't expect any of you to get this right now or on the first try. Or this is something where like you really need to have deep understanding of how this stuff works to really use this stuff, use async and await competently. But with that warning, you would do something sort of like this. You see how await is pink? It's not like the color of a variable like blue. So this is like a built-in language thing. It's not like it's not a feature that is in like a global variable or anything like that. But these two lines are equivalent. And what's cool is this allows you to get rid of the function. And you're behind the scenes, you're not really actually getting rid of the function. It's still acting like a function is there, but it's just the actual way you write it, the code. Behind the scenes, JavaScript sees this, and it basically takes everything after it in the file, and it puts it inside of like an implied then on this thing. Yeah, it's kind of nuts. We're not going to use async and await at all in this module. I didn't want like, it's cool. I use it all the time at work, and I would say like, as you start to get into doing web development professionally, it's going to come up, and you're going to see why it's so awesome. But for now, it's not something we got to worry about. But that being said, I will post this in the chat if anyone wants to digest and think about it. And if you have any questions about async and await, feel free to send me a message in Slack, or I'm pretty sure Kelly's probably familiar with it too. So you can send her a message if you want as well. But that was a crash course through asynchronous code in JavaScript. I think I was somewhat successful. You folks should know this is the sort of topic where you really need to go through it like a number of times, and every single time you have like another small epiphany and another small epiphany, and eventually you'll work your way through it and you'll get it, but it takes just a lot of iteration and trial and error. So if you don't get it on this first try, that's fine. Expose yourself to it like every month at least, and you'll just slowly start to see the same patterns over and over, and you slowly start to get it, I think. But does that make sense?
So when you put set timeout in there, you're putting that in there on purpose so that that function won't run until after you get the data back from the server or whatever. When
you say set timeout, are you talking about it here or here? Or just in general?
Yeah, no, below, because then when you were talking about the other example you have with read file, it seemed like that wasn't in there and it was just happening automatically. And I'm trying to remember back to what Max went over with this stuff on Thursday, and I thought he was just putting the set timeouts in there like as an example, like just to show how the code would work. But now I'm thinking maybe you would actually put that in your code on purpose so that you would have the data by the time you ran the function.
No, so the place you'd use set timeout, imagine you needed to, you wanted to make a button where you click it on the web page, and after you click that button, you want to wait a second, then you want to have something happen. That's an example where you need to use set timeout, because you can't really, there's no way in JavaScript to like synchronously wait, to be like, wait a second, block, like don't make the code move down another line. So the way you do that is with set timeout. Did that answer your question, or did I only answer part of your question?
A little bit, because the function wouldn't run until you click the button anyway. Like that's kind of what we were doing with functions.
The function wouldn't run until you click the button, sure. But imagine you want to click the button, then you want to wait a second, then you want to do something. So like a second.
And what would be the context of that again?
Let's say, for example, you want to do like an animation. You maybe want to like have your button animate in like some funny way. That's like a case where you might want to do it. Or maybe you want to show the user a confirm box after some amount of time to make sure they're still on the web page and like still using it actively. Like that's another case where you might use it.
Okay.
Anytime you want to defer an action to happen later is where set timeout.
Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you.
Yep.
It's really helpful for me to have real world contexts and all of these things. Yeah.
100%.
So then I was trying to put on these functions things that you talked about before, like the HTTP request or the reading the file or whatever, but this is completely different context. So good, thank you.
Yeah.
Also, Ryan, what I'm kind of seeing visually is like with the asynchronistic code, it seems to be like in a flex, and the synchronistic code is more of a box, a grid. It's, I mean, because it's going this way, and then with the synchronistic code, it's just going down straight in a block. I mean, am I tripping?
If you're doing things with your hands, I can't see you. I don't know if you said like this way, and I didn't know what you meant by that.
Don't worry about that. But you can tell I'm talking with my hands, huh?
That's my guess.
Yeah, but what I'm kind of saying is, as I look at the code and the colors and things like that, the code that was running that can run asynchronistically, it seems to be going across, moving. And the other code seems to be just going straight down in a block.
Yeah, the code that is asynchronous is you're going to see it go outward like this.
In a pattern.
Yeah, it's going to go outward like this because if you want to make things happen in series, you want to read a file, then you want to read another file, then another file. You've got to put the operation that happens after the first operation inside of the callback. So as sort of an example, if I were to put this here instead, what's going to happen here is this file and this file are going to be read at the same time. And once this file is read, it's then going to read this file. Does it make sense what I'm saying, where like the way you nest these affects the order in which they happen?
Yeah, but they don't actually happen in synchronistic order. So it's like,
more accurately, I shouldn't have said the order in which they happen, the order in which they start happening, the order in which they get kicked off.
Okay.
So in this case, file 3 reading that file, that doesn't get kicked off until file 2 has finished reading, and this callback has fired.
But it's always got something to do until it actually ends and does the last task. Yeah,
so that's the thing about JavaScript. Your code can get to the end of the file, and it might not actually be done running. And in fact, with Node, you can run Node, the script, hit enter, and your code can be at the end just kind of hanging. And the reason why it's hanging is there's things that should happen in the future that haven't run yet.
Right.
Yeah. This is actually a real problem that you run into.
I have a question too. So can some of the routines or whatever actually run at the same time during this asynchronous thing? Or does it really make them like go in order?
Great question. And yes, so the answer is JavaScript is what's called single-threaded. What that means is there is only like one execution pointer running, like going through the code. There's not multiple. So if you want to have two things happen at the same time, what's actually going to happen behind the scenes is going to kick off the first one, kick off the second one, and then whenever something like says, hey, I need help over here, the pointer's going to jump over there and it's going to work on that, and then it's going to finish it. And then whenever the next thing is like, oh, I need help over here, it's going to jump over to there and it's going to work on that part. So the actual function pointer, like the code that's running, it's going to jump around a bunch. And the term you'll hear used for that is what's called an interrupt.
What is it?
Interrupt, like when you interrupt someone.
Yep. Yeah. So tandem tasking.
Yeah. And it's worth pointing out because this is different than the way a lot of other programming languages handle it. Other programming languages will actually have two pointers that are running in parallel. And what that means is the benefit is if you have two pointers going in parallel, those things are happening really in parallel. So they can happen both at native speed. Where if you have one pointer that's jumping between two things, that one thread is kind of sharing the work for both of those tasks. So each task runs half as fast. However, there are pros on why that's good. When you have only one pointer, you're able to take some shortcuts that allow you to not have to worry about certain levels of complexity that having 2 pointers or multiple pointers would make you have to worry about. So often in JavaScript, they've just determined that speed loss is worth it because the other trade-offs to have 2 pointers would be tricky enough where we just don't want people to have to worry about it. Does that make sense? I might have gone into too much detail there, but cool. Okay. So unless anyone else has any questions, I think that's about all I've really got to cover today. The homework I was going to give you folks was what we did kind of halfway through the class. I thought I was going to take the whole class, but it didn't end up taking the whole class. So just make sure you submit that in Google Classroom, and that's really all you got to do for the homework tonight. Last thing, Max would, if he would be reminding me here to tell you to fill out the 30-second survey. I'll post that link right after class into Slack.
Ryan?
Mhm.
I think I just need a little help if you have a minute after class or whatever, doing the curl part of this exercises.
Definitely.
So,
Cool.
is that okay? I mean, I'll hang after class just a little bit. Do you have that
Nope,
time?
yeah, no problem. Yeah, we
Okay,
can be on
great.
this call.
Thank
I'll
you.
stop streaming.
Thank you.
Cool. So I think that's about all I got, folks. Yeah, thanks for coming today, and we'll see you tomorrow. Okay, Carolyn, I've stopped the streaming, so we can start whenever you want.
I
You're
will
muted.
screen.
There
I'm
we go.
sorry. I will screen share.
Okay.